The Mayo Experience.
That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. That Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by Jägermeister. Give your beer a real shot this summer with an ice-cold shot, a Jägermeister. Today, we're bringing in Brandon Barron at Daily Sports Geek on Twitter, dailysportsgeek.com, but you might know him now better as the co-winner of the U.S. Open Millionaire Maker. He did have a lineup duplicated, but $575,000. You know what? I would take it. I don't know. Brandon, I think you'll take it too. You're not going to refuse it and send it back?
Yeah, I'm not going to send it back. I'm obviously a little pissed off. It wasn't a million, but, you got to do what you got to do.
This isn't your first run at the Millionaire Maker either, though, because you had a run in football before, right?
Yeah, 3 years ago, or actually 2.5 years ago, in week 6 of NFL, was when the prize pools were a lot bigger on DraftKings for the Millionaire Maker. Actually paid 1.2 for first. Second paid 500,000. I took home second for 500,000 that week, and also qualified for the Fantasy Football World Championships. And I won a couple other smaller contests where I think my total winnings were about 590K for the week.
That's crazy. And you had an unfortunate Melvin Gordon situation that week?
Yeah, I did. That week I played a lot of guys that were super low on. If I go back and look at my lineup, DeAndre Hopkins was the only chalk that I really played that week, and the rest of the lineup was super low on guys who were either questionable or who, like Melvin Gordon, Melvin Gordon that was his rookie year. And I think he got like 2 points and fumbled twice in the first half and got pulled and didn't see the field for the rest of the game. So it was pretty amazing that I was able to finish second. I mean, I think the field then was like maybe 300,000 people in that Millionaire Maker field. So it was pretty amazing that I was able to finish second with, pretty close to a zero for Melvin.
Well, I mean, now that there's only like 200,000 people in the U.S. Open Millionaire Maker, that's a sweat. You're cutting like 100,000 people out of the gate right to begin with. It's easy stuff.
Yeah, easy stuff now.
All right, so your lineup, and you said that the football lineup wasn't really chalky outside of DeAndre Hopkins, and a lot of the talk this week has been looking at your winning lineup when it came down to this. A lot of chalk in there. That's how it ended up getting duplicated. And when now people are saying ownership clearly doesn't matter. Just take chalky guys. Don't ever get talked off a guy because of ownership. But as you and I were talking a little bit before we went on, it was something that fell through the cracks for you. And like you said, it was not your best lineup when you built them, was it?
Yeah, it's actually if you're building lineups for a Millionaire Maker, if you look at the one that I built, in the grand scheme of things, it's a horrible lineup. I left only $100 on the table, and not only that, the lineup was, a complete chalk bomb. So typically, like I told you before I went on the show, I would expect that lineup to be duplicated more than one time. So I feel like I ran pretty good that it was only duplicated one time. I made the lineups at about 3 a.m., so I didn't check through. I made 21 lineups. I didn't really go through them after I made them. I just clicked submit all lineups in the Millionaire Maker, and boom, there it was. But normally with a lineup with this much chalk, I would say you need to at least leave 500 in salary on the table, if not more than that. So this one definitely fell through the cracks, but I'm certainly happy that it did. But
I gotta ask you, when did it become like a real thing that like, hey, I'm probably gonna win this?
Well, going into Sunday, I think I was in 180th, 200th place, so I didn't think that I had a huge sweat at it. I knew if guys made huge runs, that I may be able to get into it. So I worked two gigs in the summertime. One is at a pool bar, and as I was driving to work at the pool bar, I clicked in the lineup, and I was in like 60-something place. I was like, all right, maybe I might have a little shot now. I saw I had Fleetwood in the lineup, so he was off early, making a run early. So that him going on the birdie barrage was what had a lot to do with me climbing up the leaderboard. So when I was at work, when I pulled into work, I was in like 60-something place. I was like, well, I'm going to take a little more breaks than normal at work today. And the first time I went out for a break, cigarette break, you would appreciate that. I was in about 30th place. I was like, oh, this is getting pretty interesting now. So the cigarettes became a little more frequent at work during the shift. And about every 30, 45 minutes, I was going out to check. And then I don't remember what time I climbed into a tie for first. I can remember cigarette wise. It was third or fourth cigarette when I got into a tie for first. And but I just kept working because I couldn't clock out yet. And I didn't get to actually watch until I clocked out of this job about an hour earlier. I said, "You guys, I'm leaving. I got to sweat at this. I'm going to my next job," which is a friend of mine owns a sports bar. So I knew there was going to be a bunch of people sweating the U.S. Open and whatnot. So when I got there, it was I see DJ draining a birdie putt. Didn't have DJ. I was like, "That's not good." I saw that Kepka was just made his bogey not long after that, and he still won the tournament, but he made a bogey, which was a slight negative on the score. And then Finau was the only player left on the course that was on my lineup. So Finau obviously made a double bogey on the last hole, and I was just refreshing the leaderboard, thinking surely I'm going to drop down because of this double bogey. But as it turned out, it didn't have any effect at all, and then the party began.
Well, it was kind of funny because DJ made that bogey or birdie on 18 and the double for Finau, and then Reed missed like a 1-footer on 18 too. That like really could have been detrimental to the entire thing, because I mean he would have had the 1 point for the par instead of the negative for the bogey, and that would have been a disaster. It's crazy that it all ended up pulling through. Like Stenson was on that team too, right?
Yeah, Stinson was on the team. Stinson started off pretty slow. I was sweating my team against another team. I had Stinson and another guy had Rose, and Rose was beating Stinson earlier in the day, and but Stinson ended up going on a little run and made a couple of birdies and surpassed Rose, and Rose kind of fell apart a little bit, which helped.
All right, well,
but like you said, everything pretty much broke the wrong way at the end. Reed missing his putt, DJ making his putt, Brooks making bogey, and then Finau just trying to play the 18th as worst as he possibly could.
For a while, I had a top 3 sweat with Patrick Reed, and I was like, oh, if Dustin misses this birdie putt, we're good to go here. And of course, the one putt that he makes all day is that putt. And then Reed misses the little one. But walk me through the process of building these lineups. I know you're a member at dailyroto.com, so shout out to my guys Dink, Leone, and obviously Drewby with the ownership projections, who was on the show on Tuesday, and hopefully we're going to do that again for the British Open, because I do think that ownership does matter a little bit. But you said you made your lineup super late, actually on Thursday morning before it started. So what's your process of going through that?
Well, the first thing I look at when I log on Daily Roto is Drewby's ownership projections on there, and I see guys that I think are going to be too low owned, and try to go way overweight on them. I usually play a really tight core. I played a lot more guys during the U.S. Open than I typically do. I think Drewby wrote it up. I think I played 20 or 21 guys, something around there, which with 21 lineups, I think that's a little many. But anyways, back to the ownership. That's the first thing that I look at is Drewby's ownership projections on there. And even though my lineup was super chalky, if you look at my total ownership, I was still way overweight on all those guys that were in my winning lineup. Like I was probably 40 to 60%, or Casey, I think I was actually 80% exposure to Casey. But all those guys, I was at least at 40% exposure on. So, even though the lineup looks chalky, I was still way overweight on all those guys. So if I'm going to play guys that are somewhat chalky, you got to go overweight on them or just avoid them altogether. And I chose to go way overweight on them.
Well, I would think that in terms of how the lineup was built, when you look from top to bottom, basically avoiding all the top end guys is not something people would normally do. So, the ownership was high on a lot of these guys, the actual build was somewhat of a contrarian build based on how everyone was doing it.
Yeah, I would say so. And I've typically, when I build lineups for other tournaments, I'm a super stars and scrubs type of guy, like jam DJ plus another guy at the top and fill it in with the bottom. When I went back and looked at a lot of stuff, a lot of the results for the majors, that kind of strategy didn't seem to be winning the money in majors. More balanced lineup seemed to be winning the money in the majors, with playing a bunch of guys in the 8 to 9K range like I did. I think Brooks was my highest price guy at 9K, and I think and I think Finau was on the bottom end at 7,500, and the rest of the guys were between 8 and 9,000. So it was definitely a balanced lineup, and I think that's I wouldn't call it super contrarian because I think a lot of other people have looked at the same data and come to that same conclusion that during the majors a lot of the cream is rising to the top, and by cream I don't necessarily mean DJ or Rory is going to win every one. DJ Rory Spieth's going to win every one, but that those sub 7,000 guys aren't going to have the shot to perform at the same level that they would in a non-major.
So when you first look at the ownership projections, are you just trying to get a sense of who people do like in general? Because obviously the higher the ownership projection, then that means that's where people are concentrating on. They like those picks. So does that influence your picks at all, or just how much weighting that you're going to put on certain guys?
No, it definitely influences my picks. I'm not a big Stenson fan. I rarely play Stenson. This is probably the second tournament I've ever played. Stenson in. I don't know. He's just one of those guys that I just can't ever click the roster button on Stenson. I'm a bomber type guy. I like guys that are going to make eagles, and Stenson's just one of those guys I've always avoided. He's withdrawn a couple of times. I certainly didn't expect him to withdraw from a major, but I've certainly seen him burn other people with withdrawals, and he's just one of those guys that I never ever roster. The other guys on there I roster quite a bit. Casey I roster quite a bit, which is not unlike anybody else. Casey's been has been chalked for quite some time now. I've always been a big Brooks guy. I've probably burned a ton of money betting Brooks to win, and I haven't been on board betting wise on any of Brooks's wins. But I guess this is payback for some of that. So yeah, I do find guys like Stenson. Drubia projected him at about 13%, which I thought was low for, even though I'm not a Stenson fan, I don't like rostering him. I still thought 13% was still too low for him. I thought he's a guy that should be more in the 20% range. So I don't know what he ended up being. I think he ended up being a little higher than Druby's 13% projection, but that's why I rostered him, was because Druby had him at 13%. So that was pretty much the reason that I rostered. Well, when I look at Daily Roto, I look at Druby's ownership projections, and I look at the fantasy projections that Data Golf gives, and all six of these guys were in the top 20 in the overall projections for Data Golf. So not only did I like the ownership numbers on them, they were also projected to do well. So Druby was a little bit off on some of these guys. If I total up his projections, it's at 8. My lineup would be sitting at 86%. I think it ended up topping a little over 100, like 100 or 105. So he was a little bit off, but he steered me in the right direction for sure.
Yeah, I think it means less about like actual ownership instead of getting a gauge on whether the guy is going to be somewhat popular, relatively popular, or not popular at all. It was like earlier in the week, I made some picks on Thursday, and then I kind of re-upped it after talking to Druby on Tuesday. Obviously, things change, 4 more days of research, but it really did seem like Patrick Reed was definitely going to come in at single digits. And I just took a look at that list. I was just like, I got to play Patrick Reed. Like, there's no reason not to play him. He's coming in good form. He just won a major, and for whatever reason, people were holding that against him. And he was a really good price, and you knew that you could get him at single digit. It was a reason to get on him.
Yeah, and Reed's another guy. I've rostered him a little more than Stenson, but I'm not a huge Reed fan either. But I'm the same way as you. Like, the guy that just won the Masters is coming in at sub 10%. Like, what? Why? There's not a lot of data on Shinnecock, so how do you know if Reed is a fit at Shinnecock or not? And for him to just be sub 10% is just, I don't know, it's mind-blowing for me. So I had to click, like you, I just felt compelled to play Reed because of that.
Yeah, unfortunately, there was this other name. I think it was Rom or something like that. I clicked that one, and that not so much a success. But when you say like you have this balanced build, how many lineups did you play in general?
I played 21 this week.
21 in the Millionaire Maker?
21 that's the only contest that I played was a Millionaire Maker. I looked at it and I knew that it wasn't going to fill. I don't know if it ended up with actual overlay, but I know it didn't fill up completely. So like I'm going to deposit, and that's all I'm playing is a Millionaire Maker. I don't want to win $100,000. I want to win $1 million.
It's the Ricky Bobby approach. You're not first, you're last. You got to kind of go all in on it. Of those 21 lineups, how many resembled the one that you won with, or were there a lot of stars and scrubs approaches on lineups that busted?
I think I played 35, 40% DJ. I'll have to pull up Drewby sent me the info on my exposures. I didn't even look at I kind of knew where I stood. But yeah, my main core was very tight, where I played the same guys, including these 6 guys, plus Justin Rose, plus DJ, plus a couple other guys in there, all at 45 to 80%. So there was a lot of similar lineups. I think I had 5 or 6 lineups that finished in the top 250 in the contest. So by that you can tell that the core, my core guys were there in most of the lineups. I think that my next best lineup was 68. So and that all my lineups were looking very similar. I took a few flyers on some guy like Trey Mullinax was in a lot of my DJ lineups, because when I'm rostering somebody like DJ, somebody over 11K, I'm putting in a couple of lower price guys to go along with him. So I had Mullinax in a lot of the DJ lineups. So I had a couple of guys, like out of the 20 or 21 guys that I played, 3 or 4 of them were just fillers that I maybe slapped into one lineup. So my core was maybe 8 or 9 golfers that were 40 to 80%, and a couple of fillers and a couple that were lesser owned than my super tight core.
Did you put any influence into the win stack that everyone kind of predominantly went with? That actually worked out pretty well if you hit the right guys. Obviously, there was landmines everywhere. Or did you just say, you know what, I don't care?
You know what? Honestly, I just said, you know what, I don't care. A lot of weeks I do that, and if you look at the data, it has helped tremendously in a bunch of tournaments. There's some times where you win stack and it ends up being about even, but you didn't lose anything by win stacking. But the possibility of gaining something, which you would have gained, a ton this week, was, I usually do that. This week I didn't, just because of how late I made the lineups, and so I used absolutely none of that data this week. But on a typical week, when I put more research into it, yes, I do that, and I have benefited from it a lot. And there'll be people crying on Twitter about, on other weeks where the win stack didn't work out. If you look at the tee time splits and they were pretty much even, the people at win stack started crying, the win stack didn't do anything. It didn't do anything. Well, they're forgetting the weeks in Texas where the win stack lineups were 4 strokes better than the ones that weren't win stack. So, people tend to, have recency bias on everything, and that's one of them. But that's definitely something I think you should look at. But no, I didn't look at it this week.
Well, it's funny because people were saying that after day one, because one of the prevailing notions going into it, because we didn't really know how Shinnecock was going to play. Basically, we said, hey, strokes gained off the tee is going to matter. You want the guys that hit the longest and the straightest. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of guys like that. So the lean was a bit more distance over accuracy. And when you actually look at the final leaderboard, distance did win out over accuracy with the final leaderboard, but after day one, people were like, "Oh my God, how did I ever take anyone who hits it over 310 yards? That just seems ridiculous at this point."
Well, that's the same way as every week. People look at the week one, the day one leaderboard, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this strategy was garbage." Like, come on, bud, it's Thursday. Wait until Sunday and see what the final leaderboard looks like. And bombers in general, there's a few exceptions to the rule throughout the year where the bombers aren't dominating, but I'm typically a bomber guy. I don't care what course they're playing on, with a few notable exceptions. But this week, like you said, yeah, if you look at the leaderboard, the bombers certainly did dominate. I mean, DJ was up there, he didn't win. Brooks is certainly a bomber, one of the bombers that can actually putt. So, yeah, the bombers certainly went out if you looked at the leaderboard. But like you said, on day one, it didn't look like it was going to be the case. But if you go back and look through the leaderboard now, then the win did matter, and hitting it long did matter also.
So you took a big layoff in playing DraftKings golf from the Masters to the U.S. Open. Do you feel like you rejigged your process at all when it comes to constructing lineups, or was this just more of a, hey, let's just jump back in, it's a millionaire maker, let's play for $1 million and see where the chips fall?
Well, I did revamp the process, as in I did do some stars and scrubs, but usually I play exclusively stars and scrubs. So I was like, let's try to switch it up a little bit and at least make, half balance lineups, and maybe the ones that I have DJ in, go ahead and do what my usual strategy is, which is stars and scrubs. So yeah, I guess I did revamp the process somewhat, but like I said, there wasn't much process for me this week. but it does give me, it gives me something to look forward to in the future. Is that you know don't do the stars and scrubs all the time like I used to do. And it also I can look back on this lineup and the lineup that won and say, hey, you got lucky and you won with a shitty lineup. Take your money, but don't do it again.
I've had a lot more success this year, and a lot of it actually is influenced by the Daily Roto guys, specifically Drew and specifically Leone when he's always on. And even Raza has very much told me kind of built in the same thing. These balanced rosters where you don't actually need to play a lot of them because very few people actually build balanced rosters. People like to say they do, and they call them cash game lineups. But when it comes to these giant tournaments, there's always the allure of having DJ, of having Rory, of having Speed, of having one of these big name guys. But sometimes it might not be worth it just based on the bottom end of your lineup. Like you mentioned Mullinix. I had a lot of Mullinix. I had Griot in there. I even had some other losers like Sung J Im in a lineup. I had Scott Stallings in a lineup. It just doesn't seem worth it in retrospect when you think that, hey, Tony Finau could have been my cheapest player.
Right. And, it makes a lot less sense now. The stars and scrubs used to be, without a doubt, the best strategy to go on DraftKings. I forget who wrote the articles, but there was somebody on Roto Grinders that wrote articles about lineup constructions, and stars and scrubs, without a doubt, used to be the best option. But that was when the pricing was a lot different. Now the pricing typically on the bottom end is, in a non-major week, I think it's about 6,400 is the lowest that they go. When when the stars and scrubs was prevailing, the guys you could get somebody for 5,400. So the stars and scrubs lineups made a lot more sense then. Those guys that were 5,400 were playable. When they're 6,400 or 6,600, they're not playable anymore. So DraftKings changed the way they did pricing, but I wasn't changing the way that I was making my lineups to go along with that, and I got punished for it. And that's why I was losing every week, is because I was using a strategy that was a winning strategy under an old price structure, and I didn't change my strategy, and I got punished for it.
How do you see that even translating over to football, too? Do you see the strategy differ, like you have to adapt over time with different things? 'Cause I know that in terms of football at least, nothing has really changed in terms of scoring sometimes. So do you feel like you have a lockdown strategy on how you want to build that way?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is, it's price dependent. On how DraftKings is doing their pricing structures. Where, in football, for example, there were so many weeks where I think even this last season, but probably even the last few years, where cheap quarterbacks ended up winning out, over time. Where you're seeing the $5,800 quarterbacks winning, the huge contest week after week after week after week. Sooner or later, the DraftKings pricing is probably going to change, where they're going to eliminate that pricing tier for starting quarterbacks, and the pricing is going to get a little bit tighter for starting quarterbacks, kind of like they did in golf. I mean, once that article came out on Roto Grinders, it wasn't long after that where DraftKings changed their pricing structure, because they saw that the guys that were winning the GPPs every week were playing a certain strategy, which was stars and scrubs, and they had to, adjust their pricing structure so that those guys weren't going to continue to crush it. The tighter they make the pricing structure in golf, the more evenly the money gets distributed. So that's certainly in their best interest to do that.
Yeah, Adam Levitan just released a column that's up on DK Playbook right now. So, I mean, if they're seeing it on Roto Grinders, you'd think DraftKings is going to see the stuff that's appearing on their own content site about this specific thing you were talking about. Is that I believe it was 9 of the 17 Millionaire Maker winners, could be 7 of the 17. He has the actual numbers in the column. I read it like 2 weeks ago, but it had the less than, I believe it was $5,800 quarterback appeared in almost 50% of the Millionaire Maker winning lineups, and just basically saying, hey, this is the way to build if you want to win. It's not going to work every time, obviously, because nothing works every time, but that seemed like a very sound strategy when it came down to it.
Yeah, and I don't know the actual numbers of people, the number of lineups that actually rostered a quarterback under that threshold, but just offhand, I would guess it was maybe 10 or 15% of people rostering that when it was winning 50% of the time. So obviously that's the construction you should be going for. I don't know. I haven't read the article that Levitan wrote. I'm sure he probably had that info in there too, as to how many of the lineups were actually rostering a quarterback under 5,800 and comparing it to how many were in the winning lineup. So, so in football, something like that, it's DraftKings is going to see that. I would assume that the pricing will probably be tighter for starting quarterbacks this year. But if it's not, then obviously you need to be slamming those 5,500 quarterbacks through there again this year.
So, what's your typical golf week look like in terms of just building lineups? How many lineups do you on? Let's say we're at. I know you didn't play Valero, so let's say Honda. We're at the Honda Classic. How many lineups are you generally playing?
It depends on what DraftKings offers for the week. I'm a big. Most people are always bitching about the top-heavy payout structures. Those are my favorite ones because people make crappy lineups for them. They make They make lineups that are duplicated 20 times, and they're competing for $100,000 first prize. For second thousand is $10. So, the single most important thing to do in those contests is try to create a unique lineup. I know it's kind of weird we're talking about that now because my lineup was duplicated. But that's I like I used to max out the $3 contest with 100,000 up top. They started offering them occasionally again with a $5 buy-in with 100,000 up top. Those are my favorite kind of contests because you can be so far ahead of the field just by making unique lineups, and you can do that in two different ways. One by taking a good chunk of low on players, and secondly, by leaving a lot of salary on the table. And those are my favorite kind of contests that I play. So what DraftKings offers kind of dictates what I'm going to play in a given week.
Do you ever feel like you have a particular edge in a certain week when you look at the pricing? Like you have great feelings about that week, so you go in a little bit more? Do you look at a turn and be like, yeah, I don't love the pricing this week, and you just say, you know what, I'm probably just going to either stay completely out of it or just scale back the entries that I'm going to put in, or do you try to keep it consistent?
Not necessarily look at the pricing and say, hey, I don't really like anybody this week, I'm going to play less, because there is weeks where I do like people less or like people more, but honestly, I think that's probably doesn't mean anything. And I think DraftKings pricing has been pretty consistent recently as far as how the stars are priced and how the scrubs are priced. In a sense, it is, but there might be weeks where there's somebody that's only 15. The favorite might go off at 15-1, and that guy's still priced at 11-6. Where other weeks the favorite's 8-1, and they still go off at 11-6. So you just kind of have to change. You do have to change your strategy. Then certainly the guy's a better value at 11,600 if he's 8-1 to win the tournament, as opposed to the same guy on a different week priced 11-6 that's 15-1 to win the tournament. So how they put out their pricing does influence how I make my lineups, but it doesn't influence how much that I play.
One of the biggest problems that I have, and I know this is a common question that people ask me, and I really have no good answer for it. I don't even know if there is an answer for it, because it might just be very dependent based on the type of player that you like to be. But you talked about the exposures that you had to a lot of these guys and the player pool that you had for making 21 lineups. Do you have a preferred player pool based on the amount of lineups that you make? Because I know you concentrated a core and then still had periphery players. You said you used around like 21 players for 21 lineups, and that seemed like a lot. What do you think a good ratio is for that for people out there?
I'd probably say that 10 players is probably a better group to build around than I used this week. I made a couple of mistakes this week, and that was one of them. I'd said 21 total players, but like 4 or 5 of them were just I just used the same core and threw in 5 different guys in the same lineup, just one time each. But I think that the players that I used this week was certainly too many. Say if I was building the 20 lineups I did this week, I would say pick 10 guys or maybe 12 guys and roll with those, so that if you pick 12 guys, you can basically get 50% on every guy, or an average of 50% on every guy. You can bump some people up to 60 and some people down to 40, some up to 70, down to 30, whatever. But I think 12 is probably about right if you're building 20 lineups, just so your average exposure to players is about 50%.
Now, and then would you throw in a few just darts at the bottom, like you mentioned, those like one lineup guys, just to go along with that?
Possibly, if you needed to avoid having somebody completely at 100% or something like that. Like I think I had Casey at 80 or 85% this week, and there may have been a couple of those fillers may have been in non-Casey lineups, just to make sure that I wasn't going to go 100% Casey. I have gone 100% players and previous weeks, but it's the first time I've played since Masters, and I didn't want to go 100% on anybody. So I don't think there's anything wrong with throwing a couple of fillers in there. I think you just need to keep your core guys super tight. Don't try to play 18 guys that averaging them 33% or 24 guys and average them at 25%. I just think you're not going to get enough overexposure compared to the field if you play that many players in your lineups.
So basically, when you're playing to win. If your guys hit, you want as many cracks as that top spot as possible.
Right. I either want to smash it or whiff it all together. I want to know who I'm rooting for. I don't want to have to root for, scroll through my lineups and have to root for 50 different guys. If I smash, I want to smash it where I'm going to have a bunch of shots in contention, which I did this week. This one, I had one that finished 68th. I don't think it ever had a shot to actually win. But, when you're talking about a millionaire maker with 190,000 people in it, those lineups in the top 250, I count those as all being in the hunt. So, yeah, if I'm going to smash, I want to really smash. I don't want to smash one lineup. I want to smash, 60 or 70% of my lineups. Out of my lineups, I got 15 or 16 had 6 of 6 through the cut. So I definitely smashed. I think the average what was the average this week? About 10% of lineups getting 6 of 6 in the Millionaire Maker.
Yeah, it was like 11, 12%, something like that. Much better than I had. I'll tell you that much.
Oh, you were under that?
Oh, yeah, I was way under that. I mean, I took a similar approach this week when I concentrated my core. I just picked the wrong guys.
Well, you also played some Keegan too, right?
Oh, yeah, played some Keegan, played some Rom. Actually, laid some bets on Keegan, too, in head-to-heads.
A little PayPal you sent to Leone.
Yeah, well, sometimes Leone gets the best of me. It's always good to make bets. Unless your name is Tim Andercuss, if you're making a bet with me during the show, you're probably going to win. Because I tend to back up on my really shitty ideas.
So are you like 50-0 against Andercuss and 5-45 against everybody else?
I think 5 of 45 is probably even pushing it. I'm like 1 for 50. I'm just batting 100 against Cust.
Well, so is everybody else. So.
All right. So, any final thoughts on everything that's gone on? I mean, congratulations again. It's a ridiculous amount of money. Yeah, you have anything you want to put it towards right away?
My wife is Russian. We typically go to Russia for a couple of months a year. So we're gonna, and I have 2 young children. One that's a girl that's 3.5 and a boy that's 10-month-old. So we're gonna take a nice family vacation to the motherland and probably take some other vacations to some to be determined destinations. But that's going to be the first one for sure.
Well, now with all the extra attention on you, you really need to go and update dailysportsgeek.com too.
It definitely needs a refresh. I got to get my boy Fantasy Golf Man to start pumping out some spreadsheets for me again and put those on there, because nobody wants to read my shitty articles. They go there for his spreadsheets and his knowledge. So I got to get him back on the grind with me. So yeah, but certainly needs a refresh on there. But as far as last minute advice for somebody, look at my lineup. It was not a good lineup. Don't create lineups like that in the future because it's a negative EV lineup. I know I'm saying that when I'm banking $575K on it, but yeah, kind of look at that. And I'm not going to make a lineup like that again. And I suggest that nobody else do. I hope that everybody sees it and they play chalk and use the whole salary cap every week. It would be great for me. But my advice is to not do that.
Do you think it's, in terms of, before we get out of here, like you looked at the ownership projections, you looked at Data Golf and their projections for things. Do you find it's better to do that? And you talk even about, Fantasy Golf Man, Tim Frank's spreadsheets and just kind of disseminating that information. Is that how you like to go about it? And just look at the raw numbers and extrapolate what they're telling you?
Yeah, because they all go, everybody goes about it in a different way. Like Data Golf, they're more just how the guys have performed over a certain amount of time and weighting, slightly more to their recent form. And, but they do weight a lot on long-term form as well. Whereas Timothy Frank goes about it a completely different way. He's a course fit type of guy. So he's trying to find certain stat categories where has been super important over this course for 10 years. So they go about it in different ways. So I like to go through and kind of look at how guys are looking at it, because I don't think one guy is wrong and one guy is right. But I think you're silly not to use information that's good information from different people who are going about it in different ways.
Right. Brandon Barron at Daily Sports Geek on Twitter. Thank you for being on and congratulations again, man.
All right. Thanks again, Pat. I appreciate you having me on.
No problem. This was the Pat Mayo Experience, brought to you by Jägermeister. Give your beer a real shot this summer. An ice-cold shot. A Jägermeister. You can subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience on iTunes, Stitcher, Podomatic, anywhere where you can download podcasts. You can find all that. Plus, we got another Millionaire Maker coming up on DraftKings. So stay tuned to the Pat Mayo Experience. I'm giving away some DK bucks, and you can only find out how to get into the draw for some free DK bucks if you're watching and or listening to the show. And it all starts with a like on the video, all right? I'm Pat Mayo. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
That Mayo experience! Experience!